as far as the history of the two different peoples is concerned, while Trinidad had absolutely no successful slave revolutions, Tobago had 4 successful slave revolutions in 1770, 1771, 1774, and 1801. Trinidad had the Dagger Revolt during apprenticeship in 1837, but it was not a slave rebellion or revolution. And the revolutions in Tobago, some of them lasted for weeks and involved multiple plantations with coordinated African revolutionary strikes against the white slave masters. Difference number 2, again, going back to the history, is that while Trinidad went from the indigenous people to the Spanish in 1498, then from the Spanish to the British in 1797, with the French arriving in 1783 but never being in political administration, and then us becoming independent in 1962, Trinidad changed hands 3 times as far as political authority and administration is concerned, but Tobago as an island changed hands 33 times. And each of those times there was hostile conflict, violence, bloodshed, and uprisings. Tobago is also one of only 2 islands, along with Barbados, that is claimed to not have been discovered or named by Christopher Columbus or the European enslavers. So 4 slave rebellions, changing hands 33 times, a lot of violence and conflict and bloodshed, while in Trinidad we didn't see that part of the history as part of the history of African people. So the third difference between Africans in Tobago and Africans in Trinidad is that, 1, Africans in Trinidad seem to seek validation for their social efforts, projects, and missions by the inclusion of other races. So the African from Trinidad would validate his work by saying, we have Chinese involved, we have Indians involved, we have whites involved, we have Syrians involved. So in other words, psychologically or subliminally, he's telling himself, it's more valuable now, it's worth more because we have all these different races. But the African in Tobago is much more proud of his heritage, his Africanness, his past, as Professor J.D. Elder wrote in African Survivals in Trinidad and Tobago, that the 3 main African tribes in Tobago were the Yoruba, the Igbo, and the Congo. And you can still see so many of the cultural and traditional expressions of these African heritage tribes among the people in Tobago and how they live. Difference number 4 between Africans in Tobago and Trinidad is that in Tobago they seem to have a much deeper, closely knit sense of loyalty and camaraderie to their own kind, and that there is the recognition of their own upward social mobility being due to their oneness, their togetherness, and their support for each other. But meanwhile in Trinidad, the African Trinidadian may more feel he would have to exclude himself from his own people, as Professor Lloyd Best, Dr. Lloyd Best, in the 9 Political Tribes of Trinidad and Tobago explained that African Tobagonians were able to isolate themselves geographically from white institutions, but the Afro-Saxons or the black Trinidadians felt that they had to gravitate towards European institutions in order to feel some worth or validation among themselves and to think that they have achieved or accomplished something. So the African Trinidadian is more likely to try to sanitize his views and opinions about race and ethnicity, or predicate them by saying first, I am not racist, but, and then he gives an opinion. Or he will say, I am not racial, but, and then he will say something about race and ethnicity, thinking that he has to protect himself from being seen as racist or too radical or too revolutionary by other races. But the African in Tobago does not care about that. And so when that statement was made on a political platform about the Calcutta ship coming, and in my opinion it was so misunderstood in this society, because all we see is these red flags of racism and issues of racial division. But how can you be so sensitive about statements that sound like racism when you ignore real actions that were racism?